The way I recommend and what I follow as well, that whenever something new comes out, I just go through what it's planning on doing or what its goal is, and if it's going to affect things I'm working on in the near future. So if something comes up that can be beneficial, for example, my work project, I will put it on a priority that this is something I need to learn. But for something like, let's see, multi-platform itself, we are not going towards multi-platform anytime soon. So I don't really need to start learning right now for something that might happen much later on. But rather the things that can affect my app, for example, we are right now building a design library. So if you can use Compose there, it'll be very beneficial. So Compose is something I'm picking up right now. So you don't really need to learn everything that comes out there, but you rather need some sort of a framework to prioritize what you want to learn. And it can be different. Like, for example, if you're just building out a lot of projects on your own, what are the kind of things you're going to build first and learn based on top of that? If you're a working professional, what are the things you might use at work down the line? Like maybe right now, a few weeks down the line, or maybe 2 quarters later, since business thinks in terms of quarters. If it's something 2 quarters later, you could just learn it that time. And given how quickly Android is changing, it's quite likely that even if you pick up the thing right now, and by the time you actually start using it, the framework either would have completely changed or partially changed. So in that case, you are just like doing actually a lot of incremental learning, and well, the previous thing becomes absolute at some point. So learn things that you need to, but at the same time, not saying that you shouldn't learn things that are fancy. If something really interests you, go ahead and learn. But if you really want to learn more, you have to learn to prioritize what you want to learn.
I think I've spent a lot of time now, and I think that the core essence of it does not really change as fast as people think it changes. Actually, it's the fancy stuff which changes more, because it's also, if you buy into that hype thing again, if you buy into something when it's at during its hype cycle and it's not actually getting used, it changes a lot, because the philosophy with what it started might not resonate well with everybody. Like, there are a lot of times early adopters and who might say that, okay, we really like the way this is proceeding. And a couple of examples from that, there is, I think, KMM itself, which started off actually as KMP, which was just Kotlin multi-platform using just the logic of Kotlin everywhere. And now they want to actually make it a mobile development framework and basically be an alternative to Flutter written in Kotlin rather than Dart. So that's the kind of direction they're taking, but their original direction was very different. Right. And then sort of the community and the team around KMM is now, I would say today, kind of neglecting the people who wanted to just use it as a business logic piece while write the entire UI on their own on Android. And then because their UI side, they're marrying it a lot to Compose. And they're starting off with frame design patterns which use KMM with Compose together. Now I know a lot of shops who have been using KMP when it just came out, and they were just writing business logic with that while they were doing the UI work separately, right? Will they be continue to support? They might have to change things. Similarly with Compose. So when I first used Compose did not have what today we call Compose UI. It only had the Compose compiler. So you were actually using Compose as a DSL for existing Android views. I made an app like that. It's long back. It's almost 2 years back when Compose was like not even a technology preview. It was just open source. Google did not even say that they are building something like that. Like people just found out it's there on Google's Gerrit server, and people started using that. Now from there to now, Compose does not promote that way at all. Like if like my old app, which uses Compose only as a compiler, there is no tutorials about how to use Compose as a compiler anymore. It's all about how to use Compose UI, right? So those things you feel like things are keep on changing and have to move. But say the kind of architectures or the patterns or the concept that we're using in a long-running app like Zomato's app, which was 10 years old, or Target's app, which was 6 years old. They're using a lot of concepts which have been there for 5-6 years, and they're still going to be there for 5-6 years. And when you're actually working in a big app with a lot of people involved and there's a lot at stake, you actually are very averse to using these new things, because you know that the stability implications and then the cost of switching is high. So, for example, at Zomato, I know we were using very few libraries. Even we were not using Dagger as dependency injection or RxJava. In fact, we're using a very simple set of things because it's easy to get new people on board in that case as well. You don't have to change things when things change too much as well. And as you see bigger and bigger projects, they would use lesser and lesser variety of things. They would be really sticking to the core stuff, and that stuff changes a lot less. So when you're learning, I think if you also stick to the really essential core stuff and focus more on the projects that you're building rather than, putting a checkbox on how many new libraries I know, that's a better way of going ahead. And you would not feel the world is changing so fast if you do that.
True. Yeah. And Raghav has asked the same question, like he knows like conceptually the dependency injection, but again, he finds it hard to incorporate in his code itself. So how do you suggest for the people, like some frameworks or libraries are very difficult to understand? I think Dagger is on the top of that. So I think
with Dagger, I have a very simple statement I tell everybody. Like, if you're finding Dagger difficult to understand, then you probably don't need it right now, which is a very good check for whether or not you need Dagger right now. And I used to, I remember like that whole thermosiphon example, which is like very notorious. And I have visited that website. I think first time I did when, 2013 or 14 or kind of time, when Dagger 1 was available, not Dagger 2 actually. And then I visited, I think back in 2016 or so. And then once again back in 17. And when I visited that, Dagger's concept in 2013-14, I felt like I have no clue what this is about and I don't know the problem this is trying to solve. So in 16, I think when I tried to see it, I felt like, okay, I'm understanding what they're trying to do, but I don't know why they're doing it because that's a lot of work. But by the time in 2017, I tried to try dependency injection once more again. And then I realized, this solves quite a few important problems and I see why they're getting it. And this is the same thing I teach web development as well. And I tell the same thing for people who are using Redux or any of these data management patterns like Flux patterns and all of those things. And I say that, if you feel this concept of how data is managed too difficult to understand, then you probably are working with projects which don't have a data management problem. So you just store your data in your views. That's fine. You're making a to-do list app. Why do you need two-way data binding and, syncing and, all that stuff? You don't need it. So you are not able to understand it. The day you actually are into a pickle, which Dagger can solve, you would also understand Dagger's documentation as well. I think that's a good litmus check.
Yeah, true. Agreed. Philip, your thoughts on this? Like, what's the best? How do you cope up with the Android things happening?
I guess what Saprajati mentioned is that I don't really. So I'll clarify what that means. Basically, as Arno mentioned, if you know the core stuff and you know it well, then anything else. Well, we can also dilute that back to programming in general. If you know programming, if you know the general concepts, the algorithm concepts, the data structures, and so on and so forth, the very basic stuff and how things work, moving from one programming language to another is infinitely simpler than learning the very first language that you do, that you want to use, or the very first time you start learning programming. That's something that is the same in Android with all the topics in Android. If you know Android well, if you know the core concepts, if you know how the system works, how the lifecycle works, and just in general how the platform operates and how things are being sent around, then any new framework, any new fancy thing, anything that's being added to the existing set of tools is just that. It's another tool. So for me, for example, I've never used things like, I haven't really used things like sensors and Bluetooth and all that part. I have friends who have, and I'll never learn that until I actually need it, like Saprajat mentioned. And when I do need it, it's going to be much easier for me to learn it because I have set year of experience before that. Same for Compose. I used the Android toolkit for years. And then when Compose came out, it was a mindset shift, but it was much easier for me to learn than if someone just started with Compose. Same with Kotlin when I switched over from Java. So again, my advice is that just like Arnav and Suprajoti mentioned, don't buy into the hype so much. Don't learn every new fancy thing because you think you have to. I would like bet pretty much anything that there's not a single person on this planet that does Android that knows absolutely every bit of Android. Like anyone who works at Google, even the people who have been working on it for years and actually developed Android, they still don't know every single bit of it. I'm like totally sure that's true. And that's just the situation. You don't have to know how to use everything. When you do, you're going to learn it. So just stick to the fundamentals, to the basics, and make sure that the concepts that you do use, that you do know, and that you need for work, that you understand them well, and that you're not just like using them without really understanding what's going on.